everyone, welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Can Stitch. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how I put together a project bag. I make a basic fully lined and zippered project bag. And I use a technique that I found on Craftsy that I will link below. And so this is kind of a walkthrough, and I do give you the dimensions and everything to cut your fabric. And this is more of just a walkthrough of how I assemble and put together this bag. So this tutorial assumes that you have basic sewing skills and you're comfortable using your machine. Okay, let's make a bag. Okay, so let's talk about what you're gonna need to make this bag. You're gonna need 6 pieces of fabric, 3 for the outside and 3 for the lining. And then you're gonna need 3 pieces of interfacing that will be fused to all of the outside panels of your project bag. You'll also need a coordinating zipper. For this size project bag, I'm using a 14-inch white zipper. This bag could be customized in so many different ways. You could use quilt blocks for your front panel or your back panel, or for all of it. You could use, 3 different fabrics on the outside. You could add trims. Basically, your imagination is the limit when it comes to customizing what the bag looks like. The size is also completely customizable. You'll just want to make sure you get the correct zipper if you are changing the width of the bag. The pattern I'm showing you today uses a 14-inch zipper. Okay, so I'm going to take you over to the ironing board and we're going to start working with the fusible fleece. Okay, so since I am using coordinating prints and all of my pattern pieces for the outside and the lining are the exact same size, I have decided to switch these 2 pieces and use this on the outside of the bag as an accent, and then this piece will go in as the lining with the rest of the red hearts. So I just thought I would tell you about that change before I start ironing on my fusible interfacing. Okay, so now I'm going to iron on all of my interfacing strips onto their matching outside fabric. I like to iron the interfacing onto the outside fabric because I feel like it gives a smoother, more polished finish. When I've done it on the lining, I haven't really been happy with how the outside of the bag looks, so I always do it on my outside pieces. So I'm just going to heat this up with my iron. And I like to cut my interfacing pieces smaller than the outside fabric. That way there doesn't end up being interfacing inside my seam allowance. I'm going to use kind of a between 3/8 and 1/2 inch seam allowance on this bag. And so I cut my interfacing pieces to account for that seam allowance so that I don't end up with a lot of bulk in my seams. I'm going to put the brand of interfacing that I recommend in the drop box below. I just find that this brand of interfacing is super easy to work with, and it doesn't cause like bubbles or ripples on your fabric. It lays everything really smooth. I've worked with some cheaper interfacings before that kind of bubble up under your fabric and just look really messy. So this Pellon, the specific Pellon, is my favorite to work with. Just checking my edges to make sure everything is fused down. Okay, so we have our 3 outside fabrics interfaced, and then we have our 3 matching lining pieces and our zipper. So now we're ready to start assembling this project bag. Okay, so we're going to start assembling with our 2 top bag pieces, both the exterior and the lining, and we're going to attach the zipper. So this is going to be the top of your bag. And so this is the left, this is the right. This is probably a right-hander's preference type of thing. So if you're left-hand, feel free to reverse this. But I always install my zippers so that they zip open from left to right. So we're gonna attach this zipper to this bottom edge here. And so you'll lay the zipper face down on top of the exterior. And then you'll take your interior and lay it down on top of the zipper, creating a little sandwich of your exterior, your zipper, and your lining. And you want the right side of your lining piece facing the right side of your exterior piece. I'm going to use some clover clips as my pins today. Just holding everything in place while I take it over to the sewing machine, making sure zipper and the edges are all lining up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take this over to my sewing machine, and with the zipper foot, I'm just going to sew a straight line all the way down these pieces, and I will be right back to show you what that looks like. Okay. So now we have our zipper sewn in between our lining and our exterior pieces. And so we're going to press this open. Okay, so here is our top panel of our bag with its lining piece already attached. And now we're going to work with the other front panel and its lining piece. And we need to do the same thing where we attach the zipper now to our bottom outside piece and our lining the same way right on top of it, where the outside fabric and the lining fabric are right sides together. So I'm going to flip this around closer to me so I can get it pinned into place. Okay, so same process. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and using my zipper foot, I'm going to sew straight down the side of the zipper. So now we have the second side of our zipper sewn into our outside fabric and to our lining. And I'm going to flip these out and press. All right, so everything's looking really good. This is the outside, this is the front panel of our bag, both outside and lining. And our zipper for us to get into our bag. Awesome. Okay, so that was the hard part. The rest of this is so easy. So now we're going to assemble the bag in a certain way, in certain steps, so that when we turn it right side out, the bag is fully lined with no exposed seams. So let me show you how I do that. I did just realize that I had planned on doing this panel the other way because the two swans in the center are upside down. Everything is kind of turned though. The roses are right side up. These are right side up. So I'm going to go with it, and I'm not going to seam rip and reverse this, but just pay attention if you're using a directional print, which way you're attaching it, so that you don't open it back up and realize, that your print is upside down. So keep that in mind. I think mine is topsy-turvy enough that I'm not going to seam rip it, but oops, if I had thought about it, I should have looked for these swans, because I was going to have those swans going right side up, but it's okay. I'm going to leave it. Okay, so one thing I'm noticing as I am laying my backing lining piece down just to check the size is that let me see, make sure this is all on camera. So my outside, not my outside. So my front panel looks like it came out almost 1/4 of an inch longer than what I had planned on, meaning I probably just used a slightly smaller seam allowance than I had accounted for. So before I start sewing the rest of the bag together, I am just going to trim the bottom of my front panel straight through the outside fabric and the lining fabric, so that it ends up being the same size as my backing fabric. It'll just make it easier to sew when I'm assembling the bag. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim this off so these are the same size. Okay, perfect. So now they're the exact same size. So let's start assembling. Lay your back lining piece right side up. And then with our front panel that we made, you want to lay it lining side down, right side down, right on top of that lining. And then with our outside back fabric, let me see if I pay attention to my direction. I feel like the swans are most prominent, so I'm going to do these right side up. And so we're going to lay the outside back fabric face down on top of our outside front. And so now we have a sandwich, and our layers are back lining, front lining, front outside, and back outside. And now we're going to start sewing together the sides of the bag. And we're going to start with the top edge of the bag. So the top edge is the edge with the zipper. So I'm going to flip this around so it's closer to me. I'm just going around and making sure everything is still lined up. Okay, so I'm going to use my clover clips to clip along the top edge where we're going to sew our first seam. And then I am going to put a couple on the sides just to hold everything in place so that while I'm sewing, nothing kind of skews or pulls out of place. I want this to remain as square as possible. So just a couple on each side to keep all the 4 layers in one spot. Okay, so now the first step is just to go to the sewing machine and sew a seam straight across the top of the bag. I am using between a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So my goal is to land my seam right up against my interfacing, but not go through it. And that keeps this interfacing bulk out of my seams, which is handy when we turn the bag inside out later. Okay, so now we have all 4 of our layers, the outsides and the lining, sewn together across the top of the bag. And you can kind of see here, you know, how that's gonna end up looking, which is really cool. Okay, so the next step is going to be to separate our 2 outside pieces, and those are the pieces with the interfacing, and we're gonna sew those 2 pieces together along the bottom of the bag, just straight across the bottom of the bag. So I'm going to clip these together so they stay together while I move back to the sewing machine. And I'll be right back. Okay, so now we have just our outside pieces sewn together across the bottom. And so now we're going to sew our lining pieces together across the bottom. Okay, so instead of just sewing straight across the bottom, we're going to leave a hole for turning inside the lining. So I'm going to sew from the corner in, and then I'm going to sew from about 4 or 5 inches away, enough for you to get your hand inside, down to the other corner. Okay, so I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and sew the bottom of the lining closed. Okay, so now we have our lining sewn together across the bottom, and we have left a hole for turning inside out later. So now I'm going to lay my bag back down, let's see, together in our little stack, how we had it before. And you can see we have everything sewn together at the top, and then we have the 2 bottom pieces sewn together. So now all that's left to do is to sew down our sides. So sewing down the sides, this is the last thing we're going to sew, and it is very, very, very important at this step to open your zipper halfway. Right now my zipper is fully closed. If I sew these sides together with the zipper fully closed, I won't be able to turn it inside out. So I'm gonna get inside my bag and I'm gonna open my zipper about halfway. And now I'm gonna reassemble my little stack here, making sure everything is nice and square and lined up. And I am going to use my clover clips again to pin everything together. On this side where the zipper is open, I like to make sure my zipper is laying right next to each other, and then I like to clip on each side of the zipper so the zipper stays in one spot and doesn't open or spread while I'm sewing. Okay, so I'm gonna take this over to the sewing machine and sew straight down each of the sides. Okay, so now we have our two sides sewn down, and you can see we have the bottom piece is separate where we sewed the bottom across and the lining across, except we left a hole for turning, and the top is fully enclosed. So let's turn the bag inside out and make sure it worked. So you're gonna reach up through the hole you left and feel around for the open part of your zipper and just start pulling your bag through. At this point, we're just double checking that all of our seams got enclosed. Okay, so right now you can kind of get a rough idea, oh, that corner will need to be pulled out more, of what the bag looks like, which, how cute, and everything looks sewn together. It doesn't look like I missed any of my pieces anywhere, so yay. So now let's finish it. Oh, so cute. Okay, so to finish it, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and even though I just checked my work and pulled it all inside out, I am going to pull it back to its inside out position, and I'll show you why. Okay, so now our bag is back inside out, like we just finished sewing it. And so now that I know everything is in the right spot, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to trim my corners, making sure not to cut through the seam, but I am gonna trim some of the excess out of my corners. That way when I go to turn them right side out and poke them out, they'll be more square than if I leave all this excess fabric in the corner. So just very carefully with my scissors, I'm gonna cut close, but not too close to that seam. And then I'm also going to take out some of the seam allowance leading away from the corner. Just be very careful as you do this and make sure you're not cutting through any of your seams. I'm also gonna trim off my excess zipper. Okay, so now that I have my corners trimmed and debulked, I am going to start turning this back right side out. Okay, so when I get to here, before I have put the lining back inside the bag and fully finished turning this right side out, I am going to close up the hole in the bottom of my bag. And the way I'm going to close up the hole, so there's a couple of options. If you don't mind hand sewing, you can get a coordinating color of thread and ladder or invisible stitch this lining shut. I am not so concerned with an exposed seam in the bottom of my project bag. I just want it shut so nothing falls down in there. And so what I'm gonna do is take this over to my sewing machine and just top stitch a neat edge of stitches right down along the lining to close this. So let me do that and I'll show you what that looks like. And also, I guess this goes without saying, but I'll say it, make sure that none of your exterior fabric or anything is caught in the seam when you sew your lining closed. Make sure you're only sewing through the lining. Okay, so now I have the hole that was in my lining closed, and so now I'm gonna finish turning out the bag. Oh no, look guys, look what I discovered. I did miss something when I was sewing, or did I cut too close to my corner? Oh, dang. Right after I closed up the bottom too, but that can happen. So I'll show you how I'm going to fix it. Let's make sure this other corner is okay. Yep, the other corner looks good. Not sure how I did that. I guess I cut too close. Okay. Well, let me check all of these. Nope, those look good. Okay, just messed up this corner. So what I'm gonna do, so I remember what corner it is, I'm gonna put a little clip in here. I wasn't planning on messing up in this video, but this is my second attempt at filming this and the second time I've made a mistake. So, you know, I'll just show you how I'm going to fix it. So, to fix it, I'm going to have to seam rip this little lining seam I just sewed. Alrighty, so unfortunately I gotta turn this all back inside out again. Okay, now let's see what I did down here at this corner where my clip is. Dang, yeah. I just cut straight, I cut off too much of the seam right here. So do as I say, not as I do. Make sure you're super careful. To fix this, am just going to make this bag about 1/4 inch. Well, goodness, how am I going to do this? So the lining's good, it's just this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to seam rip a little bit of the side seam, and I am going to raise this lower seam just a little bit, and then re-sew down this side seam. Okay, lesson learned. Be very careful with your corners. All right, let's turn this back right side out for real this time. And I'm going to sew up the bottom of this lining one more time. And I like to just finger press the seam allowance down and stick it under my presser foot and just sew a little top stitch right down that seam. Okay, so now my lining is closed up again. So let's turn this right side out. Okay, good. Looks like everything is still sewn together. So now I am going to work on my corners and make those look as nice as possible. As a first step, I like to just work it with my fingers, and I am just pushing on all of that fabric in the corner to kind of get my seam to look as nice as possible, or my corner to look as nice as possible, I should say. And then I'm going to go back in just a second on all these corners with a crochet hook to kind of help work them out even more. Okay, so with my trusty crochet hook, I am just going to work on these corners. This is why I don't like to use the interfacing the same size as the fabric, because these corners already have 4 layers of fabric, so it could be hard to make them look nice, and adding seam allowance in there would just kind of add to the bulkiness. Try not to poke too hard on this corner because I know that's where I messed up. Okay, so our bag is put together. Just keep in mind your corners are never going to be perfectly square because of how many layers of fabric. You might be able to get them more square than I can, but I kind of like the soft rounded look. So that is how I'm going to leave my bag. I'm going to make sure the lining is all nice and laid down in there. Zip it shut, and now I'm going to press it into place as the final step. Look at that. We've got a cute little project bag with a zipper and fully lined. You can see that piece that I ended up switching for the contrast fabric. I love this. I like to pick 2 fabrics, and I always, not always, but I like to switch out the top for the lining, just to give a little more interest on the front. And there you have it. There's our project bag. All right, we made a bag. Here's our finished project bag. As you can see, zipper goes all the way across the top and it's fully lined. You can see our little lining closure down there in the bottom. And yeah, it's great. This will fit a full-size pattern booklet and all your supplies you needed for cross-stitching. Hopefully you didn't find that too difficult to follow. If you do have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the comment box and I'll get right back to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.